Welcome to the channel, folks. My name's Shane. In today's video, we're checking out what might be the least expensive lens for the Sony E-Mount. This is the Hekka 50mm f1.4 prime lens. This is a 100% completely manual prime, offering you extreme shallow depth of field. It also offers a very vintage look, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. But before we get into it, a massive thank you to Hekka for sending this out for the review. I really appreciate it. If you want to check it out, I'll link it down below. Let's get into it. There's a number of reasons why you would want an f1.4 lens. This lens is extremely fast with that f1.4 aperture. And one of the reasons why you would want this is so you can get that crazy amount of subject separation and background blur. So if you want a look that's similar to this, f1.4 is the way to go. The second reason you'd want an f1.4 aperture is for that extremely good low light performance. So we're going to test this out in low light. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons shooting with this lens because there's some stuff that you need to know about it. Here's the packaging for the lens. As you can see, it says Sony E over here, and inside of the box we get a vinyl slip bag. We also get a plastic bag that has the lens inside. Included with the lens, we get this lens cap, and it stays on beautifully. It clicks in there nicely. We also get a rear element cap that just screws on like it would with any Sony lens. Unfortunately though, there's no lens cap, so if you do want one of those, you'll have to get that separately. Let's cover some of the specifications of this 50mm f1.4 lens. So of course, you've got f1.4 all the way this way on the aperture ring, all the way to f22. Now, if you're new to lenses, this isn't a zoom lens whatsoever. You get one field of view and that is it, unless of course your camera supports something like clear image zoom. We get a minimum focusing distance of 0.6 meters, which is 60 centimeters. So not the closest minimum focusing distance, but it is what it is. We get a 55mm filter thread size. So if you plan on shooting with an ND filter or whatever the case may be, you can find those easily online. The focus ring is towards the front, and we get an aperture ring towards the back. As you can see, as I turn this, it closes down on the aperture and opens back up to f1.4. The sample footage you're about to see was shot using the Sony A7C in S and Q mode. This has a really vintage look to it, so I hope you like it. Let us know your thoughts on it. I'll talk about the overall shooting experience and how this feels to use in just a moment. Let's talk about build quality, because this lens is a bit of a mixed bag. While it feels good in the hand and we do get that metal mount, everything else about it is pretty disappointing. I don't mean to sort of bash this lens too much, but there's a couple of things that I noticed immediately after putting this on the Sony A7C that made me think, oh. The first thing I noticed about the focus ring was how hard it was to turn. It was so hard to turn when I first got it. It's the stiffest focus ring I've ever felt. Now, some people like that, and if you're someone who likes a lot of tension on the focus ring, then you'll like this lens. But for me, it's just a little bit overkill. Although after a few days of using it, it has softened up a little bit. And have a listen to this. You can hear the lens kind of clanking in the mount here, which doesn't fill you with confidence, but it's locked in there okay. It's just one of those things I'm not used to, and you hear that even when you're using the focus ring. So just keep that in mind. Another major trade-off with this lens at the price point is the aperture ring. Now, it works fine and it does the job, but it only clicks in certain spots. So f1.4 and 2 click, 2.8, 4, 8, and 22. If you're between any of these other settings, there's no clicks. It also has this really weird greasy feel that's coming off on my fingers as I use it right now, and it's been doing that since I got it. So yeah, it doesn't feel great under the fingers, but it does work. Let's talk a little bit about shooting video with this lens. I almost found it unusable. I use manual focus all of the time, except for in shots like this, of course. But with this particular lens, I really struggled. Every time I went to focus, I was tilting the camera because of the tension on the focus ring. But where I can see this working is on a gimbal, maybe doing a follow shot, or if you're seated at a desk, for example, you could probably get some use out of it there. Part of the character of this lens is that vintage look with all of those lens flares and just chromatic aberration and so forth. So if you're looking for something that's non-traditional and it has more of an old school look, this will definitely be the lens for you. If you think this can compare up against the 55mm Zeiss, it's not even close. They're two completely different lenses with two completely different technologies. Up next, I want to show you some sample photos while I talk about my hands-on experience with this lens taking photos. So f1.4 on this lens gives you that crazy shallow depth of field, and if that's what you're looking for, this lens will definitely do that. But it's really susceptible to light kind of just coming in from all places and giving you a lot of optical distortion. Again, this is a very vintage lens. Strangely enough though, I was able to get some really clean and sharp looking images even at f1.4, and there were other times where it didn't look very good whatsoever. Its minimum focusing distance really limits how close you can get to a subject, so just keep that in mind if you are looking for a true macro lens. I tried to get the Sunstar effect numerous times with this lens and it was tough. I noticed a lack of contrast, and then I also noticed how much optical distortion and lens flaring that this lens has. And if you're looking for something that does that well, again, this won't be the lens for you. One of the things I've noticed with this lens is it probably doesn't have any type of coating on it, which helps prevent lens flaring. Interestingly enough, shooting in the shade, I can get really decent image quality. Looking at it right now on the Sony A7C. Manual focus peaking is on, so I can tell if I'm in focus, and I think it looks pretty good. The blurry background also has some different textures than I'm used to seeing, but it looks pretty cool overall, although sometimes it can look a little bit sort of choppy in the background, but it is usable, and if you want this kind of look on a budget, again, this lens will do the job. Whew, I just got back inside after shooting some low light footage with this Hekka 50mm f1.4 prime. Another major advantage to this lens, other than getting crazy amounts of background separation, is that it's also extremely usable in low light. Now at the start here, I'm going to show you some sample footage that I shot using this at f1.4, all the good footage, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the lens flaring, especially in low light. Overall, I think that looked really clean and really usable. Now I'm going to show you some footage that I couldn't use due to the excessive lens flares. As you can see from these examples, none of this is usable, at least not for this project. I was able to get some decent low light performance out of this lens, but as soon as light scatters throughout the element at the front, again, you get just such unusable lens flares. And this is evident both in the day and in the night. Thanks for watching, folks. My name's Shane. I'm going to wrap this video up by talking about who this lens is for. So if you like the look of this lens is for you. If you can live with all the lens flaring, the ultra tight manual focus ring, and the somewhat loose and greasy aperture ring, then you'll be good to go. If you're a photographer, odds are you might be able to work around the limitations a lot more than if you're shooting video, unless of course you like the aesthetic of all of those excessive lens flares. It's almost like the anamorphic lens flare, but in a very, very different way. It's just a really interesting lens, and I've had a lot of fun using it. Thanks again for watching, folks. Let us know what you think of this. Hopefully I've covered all the pros and cons in this video, and I'll catch you soon. See ya.